In the heart of the Arizona desert, where the sun scorches every memory, there lives a man cloaked in silence. His name is Kane, a 37-year-old veteran carrying wounds no one can see. He once survived hails of gunfire, once held a dying comrade's hand in the darkness. But the one thing he cannot overcome is the feeling of being left behind after the war. And then, one afternoon, he walks into a small rescue shelter, where dogs' barks echo between rusted iron fences. There, hidden in a kennel at the back, one gaze makes time come to a halt. It isn't a stranger's dog. It is Rex, the friend who stood life and death beside him in a land of nothing but sand and blood. Yet Rex doesn't recognize him. The story you're about to hear is not about war. Not only about friendship. It is about a silent promise between two survivors. That even if they lose each other in this chaotic world, they will find their way back to the light. This is the journey of Kane and Rex. A soldier who has lost everything. And a dog who seemed to have forgotten. But memories never die, as long as love remains. The sun was setting behind the Arizona mountains, painting the sky in warm shades of orange and violet, like a scar still lingering from a war that hadn't quite ended. The air was dry, but the wind was gentle, the kind of desert breeze that only picks up when a man feels most vulnerable. Kane Reynolds, 37 years old, a veteran, walked slowly along the cracked sidewalk that led to the town's animal rescue shelter. His worn combat boots stepped over each stone like every step was a memory. That crunching sound, meaningless to most, was, to Kane, an echo of years buried in gunpowder dust, dried blood, and the constant shadow of death hanging just behind him. Since leaving the military 2 years ago, Kane had tried to find a rhythm resembling normal life. He'd tried therapy, tried factory work, tried living quietly, like someone without a name. But nothing filled the void that breathed larger in his chest with each passing night. His sister, Emily, the only family he had left, had once suggested, "Maybe you should adopt a dog. Kane, a dog helped you survive before, maybe this time, one can help you live again." Kane had chuckled dryly at the time. But today, he was standing in front of an old shelter. Its rusted fences, dented tin roof, and the sharp smell of disinfectant filling his nose like a medical memory laced with military barracks. The air inside was a blend of lonely barking, quiet sighs, and gazes that had been left behind. Kane moved slowly through the narrow aisle between kennels. With each step, a wagging tail called him. An eager yelp reached out. A sad glance tugged at him. But he only nodded, lightly. None of them stirred his heart. None had that fire he once knew in Rex. As Kane turned to leave, ready to walk out as if he'd never come at all, a young staff member called out from the end of the hallway. "Mr. Reynolds, I think there's one dog you might want to see." Kane froze. "What kind of dog?" he asked, his voice as gravelly as the desert ground. "A German shepherd," she said. "He was just brought in. But he's a little different." Kane lifted his head. He didn't ask for more. He simply followed her, silently, toward the isolated kennels in the back. Inside him, something had already begun to crack open. The path leading to the back of the shelter was covered by an old tin roof, rattling softly with every passing breeze. Unlike the warm yellow lights inside, this corridor was lit by a single fluorescent bulb, its cold, sterile glow casting pale shadows on cracked concrete. Each step Kane took seemed louder here, like everything inside him was slipping back into alert mode. The girl stopped at the final kennel, one that stood isolated from the rest of the rescue center. "He's not easy to approach," she said softly, hand resting on the iron latch. "But, if you want to try." Kane nodded faintly, his eyes adjusting to the dimness inside. And then he saw him. A German shepherd, large-bodied, fur a mix of black and faded brown, like the color of dried blood and desert dust. He didn't rush forward like the others. Didn't growl. Didn't flinch. He simply lay there, in the far corner of the kennel, like the ghost of who he once was. His eyes, clouded, cold, and distant, looked through Kane, as if he were just air. Kane couldn't breathe. His hand curled into a fist at his side. He didn't need another second to know. It was Rex. He had taken Rex with him through countless campaigns, from Afghan hills to the broken streets of Fallujah. Rex had been his eyes, his ears, his silent comrade, one Kane trusted more than any human. But now, the dog before him was only a shadow. Rex, Kane whispered, as though the name alone might melt the frost sealing the creature's soul. The dog lifted his head slightly. His ears half folded. His eyes swept past Kane, no spark. No joy. No flicker of recognition. Kane stepped back. His chest tightened like someone had clenched it in a fist. "He doesn't remember me," he murmured, more to himself than to anyone else. The girl looked at him, her expression gentle with sympathy. He came in from another facility. Nobody really knew his history. Just that, he used to be military. But now, he's been abandoned. People won't adopt him. Too distant. Too afraid of noise. Doesn't trust anyone. Kane bit down on his lip. Beneath the dog's dark fur, he spotted a long scar running down the back left leg, and a torn patch on one ear, signs that couldn't be mistaken. He stepped closer, knelt, and extended a hand, slowly. Carefully. "It's me, Rex, it's Kane." But the dog didn't move. Didn't bark. Didn't growl. He simply watched him, like someone vaguely familiar. But long gone. And Kane understood. It wasn't just Rex's body that was wounded. His mind had shattered. Just like his own. Kane stood, eyes locked with that vacant stare. There was no light left. But something was still struggling inside. A piece of memory. A flicker of instinct. Or maybe just a voice neither of them could yet remember. "I'm taking him home," Kane told the staffer, voice low and resolute like steel. "Whether he remembers me or not, I'm not leaving him behind again." It was no longer a decision. It was a promise. Kane's old pickup rolled slowly along the red dust road at sunset. The steady hum of the engine blending with the long silence between two souls once bound together, now strangers. In the backseat, Rex lay still, no movement. No whine. His eyes were fixed on the window, following the sky as it darkened, as if somewhere out there lay the answer to all he had lost. Kane glanced in the rearview mirror. His heart tightened. Rex, the dog who had never let him out of sight, who had knocked over anything to reach him at a single call, now looked like a living corpse. The blanket Kane had carefully spread beneath him offered no comfort, not a spare motion, not a hint of expression. As though Rex had emptied himself of life, just as Kane had once drawn his pistol believing there was nothing left worth keeping. The truck turned onto the dirt track leading to the small cabin on the outskirts, where Kane had lived alone since leaving the service. No neighbors, no laughter, only wind whistling under the eaves and long nights without dreams. He switched off the engine and looked back at Rex. "We're home, buddy." The dog didn't move. Kane opened the door, walked around, and when he opened the rear door he bent down and called. "Come on out, Rex." The dog merely turned his head, neither forward nor back. Just a silent, guarded stare. Kane sighed. "We can start over." "That's fine." It took several minutes before Rex finally jumped down. Every step was wary, as if the ground itself were a minefield. His eyes swept the area, evaluating each tree, every unfamiliar sound. Kane did not hurry him. He simply went ahead, opened the door, then stepped back. "Welcome home." Rex entered, slowly, tense, and he froze at the threshold. In the corner of the room, Kane had laid out a new bed, a water bowl, a food bowl, and a few dog toys he'd grabbed at the pet store. But Rex didn't look at them. He just stood there, unmoving, like a gate that had yet to open. Kane understood that feeling. He too had once stepped into a house after the war, unable to tell if it was home anymore. He didn't force it, spoke softly. "That spot's yours. If you're not ready yet, you can just stand there." That night Kane left the bedroom door ajar. He didn't call, didn't coax. He lay on the bed, eyes wide, staring at the ceiling. Night wind hissed through the crack beneath the door, carrying the scent of pine and dust. After a while he heard claws scrape lightly on the wooden floor. Not by the bed, not in the room, just Rex lying at the doorway, keeping watch, like the old days. Kane said nothing. He merely turned onto his side and closed his eyes. In the darkness, the distance between them was still wide, but no longer endless. The next morning, sunlight slipped through the curtain slats, casting soft lines across the old army boots tucked neatly in the corner of the room. Kane sat up, and the first place his eyes went was the doorway. Rex was still there, but this time, his eyes weren't completely vacant. He looked at Kane, just for a second, then lowered his head again. Kane gave a small nod. He said nothing. He wasn't waiting for a miracle. Just a sign, any sign, that something inside Rex still remembered. After breakfast, Kane stepped out into the yard, bringing with him an old rubber ball, one Rex used to love during training days. "Let's try something today, partner," he said, his voice light as the early breeze. Rex stood a few meters away, his body tense, alert. His eyes followed Kane's every movement, as if still unsure. Is this friend or stranger? Kane tossed the ball. Rex flinched. He backed away, all four legs locked stiff like he'd just heard gunfire. His eyes wide with panic, his wet nose trembling. Kane froze. His heart twisted. He had forgotten. Even the smallest sound could echo like an explosion in the memory of someone who had lived through death. Rex retreated to the wall near the door, pressing himself against it. No bark, no growl, just trembling. Kane placed the ball on the ground, then backed away slowly. "Sorry, buddy, I forgot we're not in the field anymore." He sat down, on the ground, in silence. No commands, no coaxing, just sat, like a fellow soldier, waiting. Minutes passed in stillness, broken only by birdsong in the distance. Eventually, Rex stopped shaking. He lifted his head and looked at Kane. He didn't approach, but he didn't turn away. And in that look, for the first time, Kane saw something return. Not joy, not affection, but pain, something deeply, achingly human. Rex had been broken too, just as Kane had been. And maybe, that was what made them no longer dog and man, but two scarred pieces, learning how to trust again. Kane stood and slowly walked toward the house. "I don't need you to run," he said softly. "I just need you to stay." Before stepping inside, he turned back. Rex was still there, hadn't taken a step back. A small victory, a quiet nod between two survivors. Night settled over the outskirts like a quiet blanket. The wind rustled through the pines behind the house, whispering like the sighs of old souls. Kane sat on the wooden chair out on the porch, a steaming cup of coffee in hand, eyes fixed on Rex's silhouette lying across the yard near the cherry tree. No leash, no chain, just distance, a distance not enforced, yet deeply felt by both. But this time, it wasn't the distance of fear. It was the distance of patience. Kane didn't call. Rex didn't approach. But their eyes met, more than once, brief, wordless glances, not conversations, but the cautious recognition of shared wounds. As Kane stood, ready to head inside, he heard a soft sound behind him, the faint steps of paws against the ground. Not hurried, but purposeful. He didn't turn around, just opened the door and walked into the kitchen, steadying his breath as if nothing unusual had happened. A few minutes later, as he was washing his hands at the sink, Rex quietly crossed the threshold. No scanning the room, no growls. He walked to the dog bed Kane had laid out on the first day, sniffed it gently, and sat down, not lying, just sitting, like a soldier taking his post in the dark. Kane watched, half in disbelief, not because it was a grand gesture, but because he knew, for Rex, this was a war quietly won. "You don't have to remember me yet," Kane whispered. "Just know I'm not leaving." That night, for the first time since Rex had come home, Kane closed the door. He didn't leave it open. He didn't ask Rex to keep watch outside. And when he turned off the light, he saw a dark, warm shape lying in the corner of the room near the foot of the bed. Not too close, but close enough to hear each other's breath. The next morning, Kane woke to a strange sensation. Not an alarm, not a nightmare, but a soft, damp nose touching his hand. Rex was standing beside the bed. Not barking, not whining, just looking. "Good morning, partner." Kane smiled. "Let's start again." And that was the first morning they had breakfast together, in a kitchen that no longer felt so quiet. That afternoon, the sky turned gray. Heavy clouds slid over the western ridge, thickening the air like an unnamed sorrow hanging low. Kane stood in his bedroom, opening the old wooden chest he always kept under the bed. War mementos lay silently inside, like fragments of a forgotten soul, handwritten letters, a torn map, a dented helmet, and a faded military jacket. That jacket had been with him through the brutal months in the Middle East. It still held the scent of dirt, sweat, and something more, something only a dog who had lived and fought beside him would recognize. Kane carried the jacket out to the back porch, where Rex lay in his familiar, alert posture. He didn't call, didn't throw it. He simply placed the jacket on the grass and stepped back. "Let's see if you still remember," he murmured. Rex turned his head, ears perked, his eyes locked onto the object as if spotting a familiar face in a distant crowd. Slowly, hesitantly, but with purpose, he stepped forward. His damp nose touched the worn fabric. He sniffed, deeply. Then his entire body froze. As if paralyzed. As if, inside, a war had erupted between memory and the present. And then, softly, Rex let out a low whine. Not from pain, but like a sigh. Like a part of him had just remembered. Kane swallowed hard, not daring to move. Rex lowered his head and lay down beside the jacket. No licking, no playing, just lying there, resting his head on the faded cloth. Eyes closed. In that moment, Kane knew. Rex remembered. Not every detail, but a scent, a breath, a piece of the past the body hadn't yet forgotten. Kane walked over and sat a short distance away. Not touching, letting time speak for them. And there they stayed, two veterans side by side. No words, only presence. Rain began to fall, cold, but Rex didn't move, and neither did Kane. They stayed, as they once did in the trenches. "It's still you, isn't it?" Kane whispered with a tight smile. A worn-out jacket, a nose once trained to detect explosives on the battlefield. And a moment, where two souls once thought lost found each other again through a single point of contact. Early the next morning, when the first threads of sunlight were still thin as silk across the wet grass, Kane opened the back door and saw Rex already there, sitting tall. Eyes fixed on the distant forest. Like a night sentry who never slept. He walked closer, a steaming cup of coffee in hand. And for the first time, he didn't stop at the invisible boundary. He sat down beside him. "Do you remember the first time I called your name?" Kane spoke softly, as if to the wind. Rex didn't respond, but one ear flicked, just slightly, but it was a sign. Kane leaned down, set the coffee aside, then said again, this time clearer, more grounded. "Rex, Rex, come here." There was nothing remarkable about that name, if you were an outsider. But to Kane, and to the dog who had once run through gunfire at its sound, that name held a lifetime. Rex turned his head. Their eyes met. No bark, no joyful tail wag, only a silence, piercing and heavy. Then, after a moment, Rex stepped forward, just one step. But to Kane, it was a world. "You heard me," Kane whispered. "You remember." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small patch of cloth, his own name tag. Kane, once sewn on his combat uniform. He placed it in front of Rex. The dog lowered his head, sniffed. Then, slowly, gently, Rex lay down and rested his head on the patch. And for the first time since returning to civilian life, Kane no longer felt alone. Rex didn't need to bark, didn't need to leap into his arms. He only needed to hear that familiar name. In the voice of the man who had once meant survival, loyalty, and home. It wasn't recovery. It was something deeper. A touch on a soul once shattered. A soldier who had lost the sound of his own name. A dog who thought he'd been left behind. And a quiet morning, when everything was found again. With just a name. 3 days after that fateful morning, Kane stood in the hallway, holding a leash and an old dog tag engraved with 2 words. Rex, K9. He ran his fingers over the worn metal surface, listening to the familiar soft clink, like a signal echoing from the past. "It's time, buddy," Kane said quietly, eyes drifting toward the yard. Rex was lying under the pear tree in the back garden. But this time, unlike those first days, he lifted his head at the sound of Kane's voice. No hesitation, no retreat, just a slow gaze, and a calm rise to his feet. "Ready?" Kane approached, crouched in front of the dog. He held up the collar, his hand trembling slightly. "Just for one afternoon, all right? Like the old days." Rex didn't flinch, and when Kane slipped the leash over his neck, the dog didn't resist. He simply stood, silent, as if weighing a decision, and choosing trust. They walked out the gate. Afternoon light spilled across the rough dirt path, and for the first time in many months, they walked side by side. No commands, no sharp, tactical movements, just 2 veterans, 1 man, 1 dog. making their way through their own private shadows. Kane took them to the park by the edge of town, a place that had once been their post-training retreat. The trees rustled, baby birds chirped through the wind. But to Rex, the world still smelled like a battlefield not yet declared safe. He paused at every turn, sniffed the air, ears up, eyes scanning every direction. "You don't have to protect me anymore, Rex," Kane whispered. "We're home." But how does a soul that has lived in danger recognize peace? Kane knew. And so, he waited. Rex hesitantly approached an old tree, then stopped beside a worn wooden bench. The same bench where Kane used to sit for hours reading, while Rex rested his head on his boots. Rex looked at the bench, took a deep breath, and sat. Kane froze, not because of the sitting itself, but because of the look Rex had just given him. For the first time, it had light. It had memory. He said nothing, just sat down beside him. "Slow's good, Rex," Kane murmured. "I'm not in a hurry." Evening settled in, but within that golden haze, something quiet and alive stirred again. No applause, no cameras, just a soldier and his four-legged friend, taking one more step, on the journey, to finding their way back, to each other. That night, the sky was torn open by the first flashes of lightning. Rain pounded the roof of Kane's house, each drop heavy like falling bullets. Echoes of places where both he and Rex had once survived in sand and blood. Kane sat in the living room, quietly polishing an old military badge, when the sound came, familiar, fragile, the sound of shallow panting, the soft scrape of claws against the doorframe, and the wild, panicked eyes of Rex, standing there, trembling in the dark hallway. Kane understood immediately. "You hate thunder, don't you? Just like I used to." He stood, gently pulled a blanket off the couch, and sat on the floor. He didn't call Rex, didn't offer food, didn't whisper comforting lies. He just sat, and waited. The wind screamed through the cracks. Thunder cracked above the roof. But in that chaos, something happened. Rex walked toward him, slow, so slow, but steady. He didn't bury his head in Kane's lap, didn't press against his side. He just lay down, next to him. His tail brushed against Kane's pant leg. Kane didn't move, didn't breathe too loud. He whispered, "I'm scared too, Rex, but with you here, I'm not shaking anymore." A bolt of lightning split the sky. Rex flinched, muscles tight, but this time, he didn't run. He turned his head, looked at Kane, eyes glistening, like tears held back too long. And in that gaze, Kane didn't see a broken soldier. He saw a soul trying to come back to life. He reached out, slowly. And for the first time since their reunion, Rex let him touch his head. A gentle stroke, a quiet shiver, and then, a deep exhale from both of them. In the rain, under thunder and shadow, they were no longer strangers trying to remember one another. They were comrades, veterans, friends, holding on to each other at the edge of memory. The room wasn't lit. There was no music, no fireworks, just silence, and an unspoken truth. We're damaged, but we still have each other. The next morning, sunlight slanted through the curtains, casting long beams across the old wooden floor. Kane sat on the porch step, holding a worn photograph. Him and Rex, back in uniform, standing at a dusty forward outpost, sweat, mud, and an unspoken bond of loyalty etched into their eyes. "Do you remember that day, Rex?" Kane asked, his voice low but warm. Behind him, the soft tap of claws brushed against the floorboards. Rex stepped onto the porch. Not in a rush, but this time, there was no hesitation in his gaze. Kane lowered the photo. Rex dipped his head, sniffed the paper gently, as if recognizing something that had once mattered. And then, Kane did something he had long postponed. He quietly stepped back inside, opened the old wooden chest beneath his bed, the one holding fragments of war, a dented combat helmet, a cracked unit badge, and something unexpected, Rex's old K9 armor vest, still carrying the scent of sand, still stained with dried blood, but above all, soaked in memories of survival. Kane didn't put the vest on Rex. He just placed it gently on the grass, then sat beside it in silence. Rex approached, slow, cautious. At first, just a passing glance. But then, he paused, sniffed deeper, and without a sound, lay down beside it. Kane didn't hold back his tears. Not from pain, but because that simple act meant one thing. Rex was beginning to remember who he was. And in the dog's silent, steady gaze, Kane saw something return. Not everyone who survives comes back whole. But if one soul can choose to trust again, then hope has never truly died. That afternoon, they walked around the small lake behind the pine woods. Kane didn't call his name. He didn't need to. Rex walked beside him, not afraid, not hyper-alert, just present. And when Kane tossed the old rubber ball, the one Rex used to love, Rex chased it. No hesitation. Kane collapsed onto the grass. Heart pounding. "You're really coming back to me." That evening, Kane brought out his old guitar, sat on the porch and strummed a few uneven notes. The same lullaby that had once soothed Rex through endless campaign nights. Rex didn't fall asleep, but he curled up near Kane's feet, eyes half closed, ears still tuned to every string. They didn't need anything more. Just music, soft grass, and each other. And Kane knew, tomorrow, they wouldn't just be two silhouettes walking side by side. They'd be two souls, rediscovering home from the ruins of all they thought was lost. That morning, the air was crisper than usual. The wind rustled through the pine trees, carrying the scent of damp earth and something older, a memory. Kane pulled on his heavy coat, slipped a few familiar items into his pocket. A rope, the old rubber ball, and the training whistle. "Let's go a little farther today, Rex." Rex stood at the edge of the porch, posture tall, ears alert, as if he sensed something deeper than words. He didn't run, didn't wag excitedly. But when Kane unlatched the old wooden gate, Rex followed, no command needed. The dirt trail led to the old training grounds, a space Kane once used to train alone after discharge. Sparse woods, an open patch of earth, and a rotting log turned into an obstacle. A place he once came to alone. But not today. Kane brought the whistle to his lips. A short, sharp trill, the old signal for sit and wait. Rex stood still. No reaction. Kane didn't repeat it. He waited. He trusted. One moment passed, then two. And then, Rex lowered himself into a sitting position. Eyes fixed on Kane. No hesitation. Kane's throat tightened. "You remember?" Next came a long whistle, the cue for advance. Rex rose, then ran toward him. Not a full sprint like the old days. But each stride was steady and full of meaning. A gust of wind swept through the trees. Leaves scattered across the forest floor. Kane knelt, arms open. This time, Rex didn't stop halfway. He barreled into Kane's embrace. No more confusion, no more distance. Just two comrades, finally reunited in a post-war world. Kane wrapped his arms tightly around Rex, burying his face in the dog's thick fur. He was no longer the isolated soldier. And Rex was no longer the dog with hollow eyes. That afternoon, they sat side by side on the grass. Kane strummed his guitar. Rex lay quietly, listening to the wind. "I used to think we couldn't go back," Kane murmured. "But maybe it's not about going back. Maybe it's about moving forward. Together." A quiet morning, Kane stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of his shirt. He looked at himself, streaks of gray in his hair, eyes lighter than they'd been in years. And a faint smile crossed his lips. Not forced. Like before. Something had returned to him, not the soldier, but the man who had learned to live again. At his feet, Rex sat still. His eyes shone brighter than ever. A brand new collar around his neck, with an old tag swinging gently with each breath. "You ready, old friend?" Today was special. Kane had agreed to speak at a fundraising event for veterans and retired service dogs. His first public appearance since leaving the military. At the Central Park, a small stage stood surrounded by American flags and rows of white chairs. People gathered out of respect, out of memory, but what they didn't know was, today, they'd witnessed something greater than any speech. Kane walked up to the podium. Rex at his side, each step steady, like he'd never been forgotten. The crowd quieted as Kane took the microphone. "I once believed war took everything from me. My youth, my friends, and my ability to trust again. But then, one afternoon at an old shelter, I met an old friend, no, a comrade, someone who once saved me on the battlefield. And then, saved me again, in life." He knelt, gently stroking Rex's head. The dog sat silently beside him, as if he understood every word. "They say dogs don't remember. I don't believe that," I've seen eyes that had lost all their light slowly learn to trust again, to love, and to live. It wasn't just Rex finding his way back to me. I found myself through him. Applause rose around them, but Kane only looked at Rex. A glance, a nod, a quiet vow. After the ceremony, a young boy, maybe 8 years old, approached. "Mister, is that the dog that went to war with you? Was he ever scared?" Kane crouched down, resting his hand on Rex's head. Of course, who wouldn't be scared? But the remarkable thing is, he kept walking. No matter how afraid he was. The boy smiled and bent to hug Rex. The dog didn't flinch. He let the boy touch him, calmly, as if guarding the doorway for good memories to return. That evening, back home, Kane opened the back door and looked out across the yard. The sky was full of stars. Rex lay at his feet, his head resting against Kane's boot, just like during deployment. "We'll never go back to the way it was. But maybe that's not the point," Kane murmured, "because what we have now is a new kind of peace." He poured a cup of tea and set a small biscuit beside Rex. The dog didn't eat right away. He just looked at Kane, eyes still and deep, like a lake after the storm. And then, like a ritual long predating war, Kane said, "Good night, old friend. This isn't just a story about a dog finding his owner, or a veteran overcoming trauma. It's about two souls, once lost, once broken, who somehow found each other again in the vastness of life. Because some bonds never die." No one ever told Kane that healing would come from a wet nose brushing gently against his palm. No book taught him how to say, "I missed you," with a glance. And no commanding officer ever gave orders to a wounded dog to find his way back to an old friend. But Rex came back, not in a desperate sprint, but in quiet, patient steps, marked by pain and memory. And Kane, the man the world seemed to forget after war, learned how to live again. Not through pills or therapy, but through the silent presence of an old friend. They didn't need victory. They didn't need medals. They didn't need an audience. They just needed to wake up each morning, see each other, and know, we didn't let go. Because some bonds aren't broken by time. Some stories don't need a perfect ending, only a place to begin again. If you've ever loved an animal, ever lost someone that mattered, or ever found yourself reflected in the eyes of another soul, share your story. And don't forget to subscribe to this channel, so you won't miss more journeys of healing like Kane and Rex. Thank you for listening. We'll see you again, on the other side of silence.